Allô, 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 allô. Un, deux, trois. C'est fait. Bon. Allô. C'est bon, c'est bon, c'est bon. Micro.
allô, allô. La régie, merci de nous accompagner en musique. La régie, merci de nous accompagner en musique le temps d'accueillir nos premières dames, s'il vous plaît. Merci beaucoup. Mesdames et messieurs, elles nous font l'honneur de leur présence cet après-midi pour présider ce caucus. Je vous prierai de faire un triomphe pour accueillir leurs excellences, nos premières dames, Madame Dominique Ouattara, première dame de la République de Côte d'Ivoire, Madame Denise Nyakeru Tshisekedi, première dame de la République démocratique du Congo. Nous allons les accueillir avec des ovations bien chaleureuses, s'il vous plaît. Merci à vous, mesdames et messieurs, pour cet accueil très chaleureux, réservé à leurs excellences, nos premières dames, Dominique Ouattara, première dame de Côte d'Ivoire, Denise Nyakeru Tshisekedi, première dame de la République démocratique du Congo, ainsi que les autres officiels qui nous font l'honneur de leur présence cet après-midi pour cet événement mémorable. Mesdames et messieurs les preneurs d'images, vous aurez tout le temps d'immortaliser cet événement. Merci, s'il vous plaît, de libérer la main courante. Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Merci de libérer la main courante, s'il vous plaît. Merci. Excellence, Madame Dominique Ouattara, première dame de Côte d'Ivoire, présidente de ce caucus sur le genre. Excellence, Madame Denise Nyakeru Tshisekedi, première dame de la République démocratique du Congo. Excellence, Madame Tarja Halonen, ambassadrice pour la terre de la CNU-CLD, ex-présidente de la République de Finlande. Madame Amina Mohamed, vice-secrétaire générale des Nations Unies. Monsieur le Président de la 76e session de l'Assemblée générale des Nations Unies. Monsieur le secrétaire exécutif de la Convention, distingués hôtes de tous les pays frères ici présents, tous engagés pour la préservation de la planète. Mesdames et messieurs les ministres, Excellences, mesdames et messieurs les ambassadeurs, mesdames et messieurs les experts, distingués invités, illustres hôtes de la Côte d'Ivoire, mesdames et messieurs, chers invités, tous en vos rangs, grades, titres et qualités, qu'il me soit tout d'abord permis de vous souhaiter la bienvenue dans ce mythique palais des congrès du Sofitel Abidjan, Hôtel Ivoire. Excellences, mesdames les premières dames, mesdames et messieurs, Abidjan, la capitale économique de la Côte d'Ivoire, est depuis ce matin la capitale mondiale de la lutte contre la désertification, le temps d'une convention. Après le sommet des chefs d'État et de gouvernement, avec à la clé des engagements forts contenus dans l'initiative d'Abidjan ou Abidjan Legacy Programme, nous voici réunis pour un autre grand moment de cette convention, le caucus sur le genre. La tribune enregistre la participation de leaders mondiaux en vue d'approfondir les réflexions autour de la question du genre relatif au changement climatique, à la désertification et surtout en vue d'accélérer l'accès équitable des femmes à la gestion des ressources terrestres. Cet événement est présidé par la première dame de Côte d'Ivoire, notre First Lady, dont les efforts exceptionnels pour appuyer les femmes sont innombrables et éloquents. Je vous prie de l'applaudir bien fort, s'il vous plaît. Je vous prierai par ailleurs d'accueillir chaleureusement, successivement, à cette tribune, M. Ibrahim Tiao, secrétaire exécutif de la Convention, qui va venir nous rejoindre à la table de séance. M. Ibrahim Tiao qui va nous rejoindre avec des ovations bien nourries, s'il vous plaît. M. Abdullah Shahid, président de la 76e session de l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies, qui va nous rejoindre également. M. Abdullah Shahid, vous êtes invité, s'il vous plaît. Madame Amina Mohamed, vice-secrétaire générale des Nations unies, que nous invitons à nous rejoindre à la tribune avec vos ovations, s'il vous plaît. Madame Aguilar, auteure principale, ancienne vice-ministre des Affaires étrangères du Costa Rica, qui va également nous rejoindre. Excellence, Madame Denise Nyakeru Tshisekedi, première dame de la République démocratique du Congo, qui va nous rejoindre. Et évidemment, Excellence, Madame Dominique Ouattara, première dame de la République de Côte d'Ivoire, qui va nous rejoindre à la table de séance avec des ovations bien nourries, s'il vous plaît. Et je rappelle qu'au programme, nous entendrons respectivement M. Ibrahim Tiao, secrétaire exécutif de la Convention, M. Abdullah Shahid, président de la 76e session de l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies, Mme Amina Mohamed, vice-secrétaire générale des Nations unies, Son Excellence Mme Kadra Mahmoud Ahid, première dame de Djibouti, qui malheureusement n'a pu faire le déplacement. Et nous aurons beaucoup de plaisir à entendre l'allocution très attendue de Mme Dominique Ouattara, première dame de Côte d'Ivoire, présidente de ce caucus. Avec votre permission, Excellence, nous allons ouvrir la série des allocutions et inviter à cette tribune M. Ibrahim Tiao, secrétaire exécutif de la Convention, que je vous prie d'accueillir très chaleureusement, s'il vous plaît.
Son Excellence, Madame Dominique Ouattara, première dame de Côte d'Ivoire et présidente de ce Gender Caucus de la COP 15, merci de votre leadership et merci pour l'intérêt et de votre intérêt manifeste à cet événement. Son Excellence, Madame Denise Nyakeru Tshisekedi, première dame de la République démocratique du Congo. Son Excellence, Monsieur Abdullah Shahid, président de l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies. Merci aussi, Monsieur le Président, d'être venu et pour tout votre intérêt. Son Excellence, Madame Amina Mohamed, vice-secrétaire générale des Nations unies. Merci, Madame, pour votre vision. Merci pour votre courage. Madame Tarja Halonen, ancienne présidente de Finlande et ambassadrice de bonne volonté de la Convention des Nations unies sur la lutte contre la désertification. Chers collègues des Nations unies, je reconnais aussi plusieurs collègues des Nations unies, chefs d'agence des Nations unies, d'ailleurs la plupart du temps au féminin. Ça mérite des applaudissements. Distingués invités, mesdames et messieurs, j'éprouve un immense plaisir à vous souhaiter la cordiale bienvenue à cet événement de haut niveau sur le genre, organisé au premier jour de la conférence des parties de la Convention des Nations Unies sur la lutte contre la désertification. Je savoure d'autant plus ce plaisir que nous sommes de nouveau en mesure de nous retrouver dans cette belle salle après une longue et difficile période de restrictions sanitaires. Permettez-moi avant tout d'exprimer toute ma gratitude à nos généreux hôtes, à savoir le peuple et le gouvernement de Côte d'Ivoire. Nos remerciements s'adressent en particulier à vous, Madame la Première Dame Dominique Ouattara. L'enthousiasme avec lequel vous présidez à cet événement et votre soutien sans faille sont notés avec une grande satisfaction. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the negotiations on land degradation and drought at this COP are the most important in the UNCCD's history, and they can only succeed if they are built on balanced foundation, which must include gender equality. The conclusions of the study we are presenting today are sobering. The study demonstrates that women and girls are particularly vulnerable to impacts of land degradation and drought. For example, when drought hits a region, food and water become naturally scarce. This affects the way food is distributed within a family. Women, the study found, tend to eat smaller portions or skip meals. They give priority to members of their family, starting with young children. In the least developed countries, agriculture is the main livelihood for nearly 80% of employed women. Yet, more often than not, they do not own the land. Only 23% in Central Asia and the Caucasus, and just 4% in the Middle East and North Africa. Think about it. If we bring 100 people in this room from the region with land titles, only 4 of them will be women. And limited rights means limited access to loans, to credits, to services and training, stacking the odds against the very people working the land and perpetuating poverty. Nothing stable can be built with half the foundation missing. So there will be no sustainable development if half of humanity and half of our producers are left on the sidelines. This vicious cycle of poverty must be turned into a virtuous one of prosperity by unleashing the transformative power of women and girls to heal land and soil. They are achieving many of the land restoration successes, often with little support or recognition. In West Africa, for example, women are involved in major land restoration initiatives, such as the Great Green Wall. In the Middle East and North Africa, they undertake land conservation and restoration initiatives that bring food security. Where water is scarce, they find innovative and traditional solutions like fog harvesting, which we have seen in Morocco. Examples are plentiful from around the world where women and girls exercise their leadership on land restoration unnoticed, unpaid. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, now is the time for action with inclusion and solidarity to halt climate change and reverse biodiversity loss and land degradation. We cannot ignore half of the population of the world. This is a decisive decade where we need to change our mindsets invest heavily in education, training, and access to sustainable technologies for millions of women and girls. We need to facilitate the inclusion of women into the financial systems. We need to dismantle all barriers and eliminate laws and practices that prevent women and girls from accessing and using land. Our UNCCD Convention is about the people and the planet. Healthy land for healthy people and healthy economies. All people, not just half of them. With that in mind, I invite you to join the Abidjan Declaration on Achieving Gender Equality for Successful Land Restoration. I also invite you to commit and act to improve the lives and dignity of women and girls facing the formidable daily challenges of drought, land degradation, and desertification. I thank you.
Merci à vous, Monsieur Ibrahim Tiao, secrétaire exécutif de la Convention. Madame la Première Dame de la République démocratique du Congo, merci de nous avoir rejoints. Mesdames et messieurs, je vous prie de faire une ovation pour Madame Denise Tshisekedi, aux côtés de sa sœur, Madame Dominique Ouattara, la Première Dame de la République de Côte d'Ivoire. Merci beaucoup. Nous allons, avec votre permission, Excellence, inviter à la tribune pour son allocution Monsieur Abdullah Shahid, président de l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies, que je vous prie d'accueillir chaleureusement, s'il vous plaît.
Your Excellency, Madam First Lady, Dominique Ouattara, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I congratulate the government of Côte d'Ivoire, through you, Madam First Lady, for hosting today's very timely event. The second edition of the Global Land Outlook, released last month, presented a stark reminder. 40% of the planet's land has degraded, directly affecting half of humanity. If we do not reverse the current trend, we stand to lose 95% of the Earth's land by 2050. We can no longer live in the delusion that land degradation is a far distant scenario. It is happening and unfolding in our very own backyard. And it is women who are, as is far too often the case, bearing the brunt of the impacts. In the developing countries, where land degradation is more pronounced, women often have the role of providing food and water. Given their substantial role in agriculture and food production, women are disproportionately affected when land is degraded and becomes scarce. Adding to the problem is the issue of land ownership. While no systematic global data exists, preliminary estimates suggest that women account for less than 20% of the world's land ownerships. We must acknowledge that when women do not legally own their land, or where customs and practices prevent their ownership of land, they are not recognized as farmers or value chain actors. This gender bias approach excludes women from access to extension services and inputs available to bona fide farmers, a majority of which are men. Without access to new agricultural technology and agricultural supportive systems, women are unable to increase land productivity and yields or invest in sustainable land management. My dear friends, not only is this a failure of our society, but a clear violation of the human rights. Inaction is too costly for humanity, for prosperity, and for our planet. This caucus is thus an important platform to translate the bold commitments of the Gender Action Plan into gender-responsive and impactful actions on the ground. We need to understand the undercurrents of these disproportionate impacts. This requires us to target gender issues and rights-based policies to address the differing impacts of land degradation on women and men. Likewise, the connection between ecosystem type, cultural practices, and primary economic production must be considered in addressing gender concerns in the dry lands, because we cannot close the gender equality gap if we do not adequately measure the inequalities. Women remain untapped resources, and their inputs, knowledge, and guidance are essential in climate action as well as land restoration and mitigation. We must provide avenues and support measures, including laws that will protect the right of access to land ownership during the whole life cycle. We need to ensure equal hereditary rights for women and girls. Excellencies, dear friends, we have much to accomplish. This is why we need to speak out on this issue, and more importantly, why we need to walk the talk to keep gender equality at the heart of all our discussions. No single government can accomplish this on their own. It must be a unified effort and spirit with the United Nations, policymakers, implementing agencies, the private sector, civil society, and communities sharing the responsibility. I congratulate this caucus on the adoption of the declaration that aims to show up support and concrete action on gender equality for effective land stewardship. Let us continue to work together with gender equality as an explicit and non-negotiable objective for sustainable development. I wish this meeting every success, and I thank you.
Merci à vous, Monsieur Abdoulaye Chahid, président de l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies. Mesdames et Messieurs, nous poursuivons avec la série des allocutions et nous invitons à cette tribune Madame Amina Mohamed, secrétaire générale adjointe des Nations unies, avec des ovations bien nourries, s'il vous plaît.
Her Excellency Ms. Dominique Ouattara, the First Lady of Côte d'Ivoire, Her Excellency Denise Nyakero Tshisekedi, the First Lady of the DRC, Excellencies, First Ladies, the former President of Finland, Tarja Halonen, our ministers, and let me just say here today, the first women of the United Nations who are also with us today in the hall. Dear Ibrahim Thiaw, our Executive Secretary of the UNCCD, and then, of course, my boss, the President of the General Assembly, Abdullah Shahid. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to join you at this high-level event today. This Gender Caucus, the very first day of the UNCCD COP, provides a precious space for us to discuss how to turn women's rights and gender equality into real actions on the ground in the lives of all women. Yesterday, I was privileged and accompanied by three amazing women, ministers for women affairs of the Côte d'Ivoire, of national planning, who led us, and of course from the First Lady's office, to see for myself firsthand the agroforestry that the UN is partnering with Côte d'Ivoire at the local level. But much more importantly, to see women whose children had previously been in child labor, being taken out by an initiative of the First Lady, and to see a center that was given the quality and the standard that any child should expect for their rights to education, to health, and the most important right of all, to be a child. As we meet today, inequality and environmental degradation continues to threaten the lives and the well-being of millions across the globe. Human activities have already altered 70% of the land, and every other person on Earth is negatively affected by the loss and degradation of the soil that feeds us. More than 1.5 billion people were affected by droughts between 1998 and 2017. No region of the world is spared, and droughts are increasing in scope, intensity, and frequency due to climate change and our unsustainable patterns of production and consumption. Throughout, it is the women and girls who are most affected, carrying the burden of the intensified drought, desertification, and land degradation. By the time we complete the first hour of this meeting today, women and girls would have spent more than 8 million hours of time walking back-breaking long distances just to collect water. In some cases, women spend more than an hour a day just fetching water, only to find out that the water is unfit for consumption, causing disease and sometimes even their lives. In addition, women make up more than half of the world's agricultural workforce and play a key role in the health of the land. Agriculture remains the most important employment sector for women in low-income or lower middle-income countries. However, less than 13% of agricultural landholders are women. Millions of women are denied the right to own land on which they live, work, and care for their families. Discrimination related to land tenure, credit access, equal pay, and decision-making are widespread, leading to increasing trends of poverty and inequality, and many women being left behind. As a result, the gender food security gap has widened significantly from 6% in 2019 to 10% in 2020. COVID-19 has devastated global food and nutrition systems and increased food prices, causing more women and girls to confront hunger, undernourishment, a situation that is poised to worsen considerably because of another crisis, the war in Ukraine. We must break this cycle. The UNCCD study we are launching today focuses on the differentiated impacts of desertification, land degradation, and drought. It presents sobering conclusions and identifies opportunities for action. It finds, for instance, that 38 million widows live in extreme poverty in the world, notably due to disinheritance practices. Having lost their loved ones, they are often left with children to care for and educate. Yet in more than 100 countries, there is still a form of denial of their husband's property. Excellencies, without ambition and determination, nothing will change. We must build on existing frameworks to improve the lives of women, which in turn improves the lives of everyone. In a landmark resolution in 2021, the Human Rights Council recognized the right to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment and encouraged states to protect these rights for all people, especially our women. And at this year's Commission on the Status of Women, member states agreed that this link between gender equality and the environment is fundamental for sustainable development and that we can't achieve one without the other. It is no longer the time for commitments and promises. It is now the time to turn those into action. I would like to highlight some key steps that I believe that we could take today. First, we need women at all decision-making tables, from villages to the town halls to the cabinet and the presidency. Let us stop the marginalization of women's leadership and increase their participation in decision-making on issues related to climate change, including environmental and disaster risk reduction policies and programs. For years, we have said that climate change is man-made, and I just want to underscore here today, ladies, that it says man-made. If we were in decision-making, we would not have the kind of emissions we have that are taking us to a 3.2-degree world. Women play a crucial role in building resilient communities by finding innovative solutions, maintaining traditional resource conservation techniques, and spreading indigenous knowledge and urging action on land degradation. Second, it is critical that we design, develop, and implement gender-responsive sustainable development and land management frameworks, agriculture and rural development policies, and that early warning systems need to respond to the needs and priorities of rural women and girls. Third, we must accelerate efforts to eliminate the multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and violence that women and girls face, especially rural women. And we must promote and ensure the availability of gender-responsive finance These mechanisms must support the rights, the needs, and the priorities of rural women and girls. Excellencies, achieving gender equality by 2030 requires urgent action to eliminate many root causes of discrimination. Sustainable land management, the very objective of the UN Convention to combat desertification, is a key enabler of these efforts. It can create sustainable livelihoods, opportunities that will give women and girls around the world, including women small-scale farmers, indigenous people, local communities, women-led businesses and entrepreneurs, and our young. And it can catalyze women and girls' contributions towards restoring our balance with nature. Madam First Lady, I would like to commend your leadership and commitment across all these efforts. The outcome document of this caucus, the Abidjan Declaration on Achieving Gender Equality for Successful Land Restoration, will serve as a compass to all of us. I'm also confident that all the leaders that are present here today, through all the constituencies that we have, will use their voices, their networks, their leadership to highlight the fundamental role of women and girls in land restoration to achieve all our sustainable development goals. I thank you for contributing to this important caucus and our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Merci infiniment, Madame Amina Mohamed, secrétaire générale adjointe des Nations Unies. Mesdames et Messieurs, la Côte d'Ivoire est très heureuse d'accueillir sur ces terres la Première Dame de la République démocratique du Congo, Madame Denise Tshisekedi. Madame la Première Dame, nous serons encore plus heureux d'entendre votre contribution à la faveur de ce caucus sur le genre. Je vous prie de l'accueillir très chaleureusement, Madame Denise Tshisekedi.
Distinguée Première Dame, chères sœurs, distingués invités, Mesdames et Messieurs, en vos titres et qualités respectifs, je suis heureuse de me retrouver parmi vous au lancement de ce caucus sur le genre portant sur la désertification. En effet, comme nous le savons bien, les femmes représentent plusieurs maillons de la chaîne agricole. Elles représentent la moitié de la main-d'œuvre agricole en Afrique subsaharienne, par exemple, et cependant, elles ne détiennent que 18% des titres fonciers et de par leur faible statut social, manquent de protection dans les zones où elles travaillent. Elles sont donc les premières à subir les impacts de la désertification. Je tiens ici à féliciter les organisateurs qui ont pensé insérer cette question si cruciale au cours de cette deuxième édition. En effet, je me tiens ici comme porte-voix de toutes ces femmes qui, partout dans le monde, et particulièrement en Afrique subsaharienne et dans les zones rurales, subissent en première ligne les conséquences de ce phénomène. Nous appelons ainsi tous les participants, acteurs de la société civile, délégués des pays membres, décideurs à tous les niveaux, acteurs des organisations non gouvernementales, présents à ces assises, à mener à bien les réflexions afin de trouver les solutions durables pour toutes ces femmes. Je vous remercie.
Merci à vous, Madame Denise Tshisekedi, Première Dame de la République démocratique du Congo. Mesdames et Messieurs, ces actions en faveur des femmes en Côte d'Ivoire et dans le monde ont justifié qu'elle soit désignée la présidente de ce caucus sur le genre. C'est à elle que revient à présent l'honneur de prendre la parole. Je vous prie d'accueillir à cette tribune Son Excellence, Madame Dominique Ouattara, Première Dame de la République de Côte d'Ivoire.
Mesdames et Messieurs, je suis très heureuse de prendre part à ce deuxième caucus du genre de la conférence des parties à la Convention des Nations Unies sur la lutte contre la désertification qui se tient à Abidjan du 9 au 20 mai 2022. Avant tout propos, je voudrais vous transmettre les salutations de mon cher époux, le président Alassane Ouattara, qui se réjouit de votre présence en Côte d'Ivoire. Je voudrais à présent saluer bien chaleureusement mes sœurs, son Excellence Madame Denise Tshisekedi, Première Dame de la République du Congo, que je vous demande d'applaudir très fort, et son Excellence Madame Tarja Halonen, anciennement présidente de Finlande et ambassadeur des Nations Unies pour les terres. Merci, chères sœurs, de votre présence à cet important événement. Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais également saluer et remercier son Excellence, Monsieur Abdullah Chahid, président de la 76e session de l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies, et son Excellence, Madame Amina Mohamed, vice-secrétaire générale des Nations unies. Je voudrais vous souhaiter le traditionnel bienvenue en terre ivoirienne et je vous demande de les applaudir très fort. Je salue également Madame Maïmouna Koné, épouse de Monsieur le vice-président, et Madame Florence Hachi, épouse de Monsieur le Premier ministre, ainsi que nos sœurs, épouses de présidents d'institutions de la République de Côte d'Ivoire, qui sont à nos côtés cet après-midi. Mes salutations vont à l'endroit, à présent, de Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres et ambassadeurs, ainsi que les chefs des délégations et toutes les personnalités qui prennent part à ce caucus du genre. J'associe à ces salutations les épouses des ministres, des ambassadeurs et des personnalités ici présentes. Je voudrais à présent saluer notre compatriote, M. Abou Bamba, président du comité d'organisation de la COP 15, et le féliciter, ainsi que toute son équipe, pour le travail réalisé pour la bonne tenue de cet événement qui est accueilli pour la première fois dans notre pays. J'adresse également mes salutations à Mesdames et Messieurs les experts et les représentants du secteur privé et de la société civile, ainsi qu'à toutes nos sœurs du monde agricole venues des 31 régions de notre pays. Je vous demande de les applaudir très très fort. Je n'oublie pas de saluer nos chefs traditionnels et religieux, que je remercie pour leur bénédiction, ainsi que nos amis de la presse ici présents. Enfin, je remercie chacun de vous pour vos distinguées présences à nos côtés cet après-midi. Mesdames et Messieurs, distingués participants, ce caucus a pour thème « Terre, vie, patrimoine, d'un monde précaire vers un avenir prospère ». Cette réunion de haut niveau se veut une plateforme de soutien aux initiatives et un catalyseur de la mise en œuvre du plan d'action pour l'égalité des sexes au niveau des pays. Il se propose également de contribuer à l'autonomisation des femmes agricultrices. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, comme vous le savez, les femmes constituent l'un des maillons les plus importants de la société et des actrices de premier plan dans le domaine de l'agriculture. En effet, elles sont omniprésentes dans toutes les étapes de la production, de la commercialisation et de la consommation des cultures vivrières et des cultures de rente. À cet effet, une étude de la Banque mondiale en 2017 révèle que les femmes sont l'épine dorsale de l'économie rurale, surtout dans les pays en développement. Elles représentent pratiquement la moitié des agriculteurs dans le monde. Malgré le rôle et l'influence des femmes dans les économies de nos pays, l'appui dont elles bénéficient est encore bien inférieur à celui des hommes. Dans le domaine agricole, beaucoup de femmes sont souvent marginalisées ou même exclues des marchés à forte valeur ajoutée, que ce soit pour l'intérieur ou l'exportation, parce qu'elles manquent par exemple de moyens de transport, de stockage adéquats, d'installation, de transformation et souvent d'information. Bien que les organisations de producteurs, telles que les coopératives et les partenariats publics-privés, fournissent de plus en plus de services aux producteurs, relativement peu de femmes en bénéficient, en raison des coûts éventuels ou des contraintes sociales. Dans le domaine du foncier, les femmes se heurtent aux règles coutumières qui restreignent leur droit à la propriété foncière malgré les avancées politiques dans nos pays africains. Cet état de fait les place ainsi dans une position permanente de faiblesse et d'insécurité foncière qui les empêche de s'investir pleinement et en toute quiétude dans les productions agricoles. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, en ma qualité de femme, de mère, et en raison de mon engagement à œuvrer pour le bien-être des femmes, je place beaucoup d'espoir dans ce caucus du genre, car nous savons tous comment la désertification appauvrit une nation en détruisant les économies ou comment elle relègue nos enfants dans un avenir sombre et comment, pour des millions de femmes, cela se traduit par un cycle sans fin de pauvreté. Nos sœurs passent des heures à chercher de l'eau, à labourer un sol aride, en plus d'effectuer leurs tâches ménagères habituelles. La désertification contribue donc à détériorer la santé des femmes et les rend plus vulnérables. En effet, parce qu'elles entretiennent un rapport direct avec la terre, les femmes doivent bénéficier d'une attention particulière de la part des gouvernants, des Nations Unies, des bailleurs de fonds, enfin de tous. En somme, ce caucus doit apporter des réponses concrètes aux problèmes inhérents aux femmes face au changement climatique. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, en la matière, notre pays, la Côte d'Ivoire, est très actif dans la recherche de solutions contre la déforestation, la dégradation des terres et le changement climatique en relation avec la problématique du genre. Plusieurs programmes sont en cours d'exécution dans notre pays et le président de la République, son Excellence Alassane Ouattara, présentera l'initiative d'Abidjan appelée Abidjan Legacy Programme, qui est une réponse de la Côte d'Ivoire à la mise en œuvre des résolutions de la COP 15 où les stratégies d'autonomisation des femmes occupent une place importante. En ce qui me concerne, je me bats pour permettre aux femmes d'acquérir plus d'autonomie pour améliorer leurs conditions de vie et celles de leur famille. C'est dans ce cadre qu'en 2012, j'ai créé le Fonds d'appui aux femmes de Côte d'Ivoire, FAFSI, avec l'aide du président de la République. C'est un fonds à taux d'intérêt réduit qui est octroyé sans exigence de garantie aux femmes non éligibles aux prêts classiques et qui leur permet de financer leur activité génératrice de revenus. Il est doté d'un capital de 25 milliards de francs CFA et a permis à ce jour à plus de 300 000 femmes ivoiriennes d'être financièrement autonomes et de prendre en charge leur famille, soit plus de 2 millions de personnes épargnées de la pauvreté. Le FAFSI permet aux femmes de jouer une part active dans la bonne marche de la société. Car améliorer la vie des femmes, c'est améliorer la vie de toutes les nations. C'est en raison de cette corrélation positive entre le statut global des femmes et le bien-être de toute une nation que ce caucus du genre doit permettre de faire des progrès significatifs dans ce sens et de poser des gestes concrets. J'en appelle donc à une meilleure participation des femmes à la vie économique et à l'accroissement de leur pouvoir d'action pour renforcer leurs droits. Ceci leur permettra d'avoir la maîtrise de leur vie et d'exercer une influence au sein de la collectivité. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, chers participants, je conclurai en disant que nos attentes sont importantes parce que nous devons coûte que coûte gagner ensemble le pari de l'autonomisation des femmes agricultrices à travers diverses mesures, dont la sécurisation foncière et la création d'une femme pour les banques rurales. Enfin, je voudrais adresser mes vifs remerciements aux Nations Unies et à toutes les organisations internationales qui ont permis la tenue de cet événement dans notre cher pays. Je vous souhaite d'excellents travaux à toutes et à tous. À présent, je déclare ouvert le caucus du genre de la 15e session de la Conférence des parties à la Convention des Nations Unies sur la lutte contre la désertification et la sécheresse. Je vous remercie.
Merci à vous, Madame Dominique Ouattara, première dame de Côte d'Ivoire, présidente de ce caucus sur le genre. Excellence, Madame la Première Dame, Mesdames et Messieurs, ce soir nous avons une belle occasion de découvrir les impacts différenciés de la désertification, de la dégradation des terres et de la sécheresse avec des preuves scientifiques et des pratiques prometteuses à l'appui. C'est tout le sens de la principale conférence inaugurale de ce caucus sur le genre qui sera faite par Madame Lorena Aguilar. Elle est auteure principale, ancienne vice-ministre des Affaires étrangères du Costa Rica. C'est à elle que revient l'honneur de prononcer cette conférence. Je vous prie de l'accueillir bien chaleureusement, s'il vous plaît.
Observing all protocol, Your Excellencies, high authorities, colleagues, and friends. Gender continues to be one of the world's strongest markers of disadvantage, which is why reducing gender equality is fundamental to achieving the SDGs and other internationally agreed upon goals. Unfortunately, to date, data on the differentiated impacts of DLDD on women and men has been minimal or scant. Recognizing this reality, the parties requested the Secretariat of UNCCD to reduce this gender-related knowledge gap. The study we are presenting today is a response to this appeal. The study shed light on the impacts of land degradation and drought by looking at 6 structural knots of gender inequality: socioeconomic inequality and the persistence of poverty, the inequitable control of access to natural resources, including land, lack of or limited access to markets, capital, training, technical assistance, financial services, and technologies. 4th, patriarchal, discriminatory, and violent cultural patterns. 5th, the sexual division of labor and the unfair social organization of care. And 6th, the concentration of power and hierarchical relationships prevailing in institutional decision-making structure in sustainable development. These structural knots of gender inequality are socially constructed drivers of risks. Therefore, efforts to ensure more gender-responsive outcomes needs to begin by tackling the structural nature of this challenge. As a result of this research as well, for the first time, the UNCCD counts with ready available data sets, for example, on women participation at COPs, and the level of inclusion of gender within various UNCCD reporting processes. But we also looked at the reports of the CEDAW to analyze, and we were able to identify how DLDD was included. When it comes to land degradation, the study part of the recognition that land remains the most fundamental asset for most of the women and men living in developing countries, and that, as the SDGs acknowledges, women's secure access to land is central component of women economics empowerment. To understand the gendered dimensions of land degradation, the report examined the difference between land governance, land tenure, and tenure security, and how these vary regionally and are tied more broadly to social, economic, and political equity constructs. The study showed major gaps with regards to women land ownership across regions. For example, less than 20% of all landholders globally are women. Only 44 countries accord women the same inheriting rights as men, both in law and in practice, while 29 countries do not grant female surviving spouses and daughters the same rights as their male equals to inherit land and non-land assets. Disinheritance of the surviving spouse still occurs in 96 countries. And women's rights to inherit their husband's property are denied in 102 countries under customary, religious, or traditional laws and practices. And 103 countries do not criminalize property disposition of grabbing of inheritance. We may ask ourselves why this is important. Equitable land governance and land security tenure are critical to enabling land restoration, efforts led by women, for example, for making investments for sustainable land management, such as soil conservation, terracing, tree planting, and establishing buffer zones. If you're not the owner, you cannot decide. Likewise, insecure tenure rights are frequently cited as contributing to land and forest degradation. Not having land titles that can be used as collaterals or the lack of secure tenure hinders women's access to loans and credits and limits their access to extension services and training. Consequently, there will not be gender equality without women's rights to land. Addressing women's land rights is imperative to any effort related to combat land degradation, desertification, and droughts. Land degradation, as Ibrahim presented to us, also has a differentiated impact on the health of men and women. As the soil loses their productive capacity, this affects food security, diminishing secure and sustainable access to sufficient food for active and healthy lives. This phenomena is also exacerbated by social cultural practices related to intra-household food distribution patterns. For example, it is common in many societies to distribute food according to your sex, your age, and your status. Under this system, males usually get served first, followed by boys, girls, and women. This may be one of the reasons why nutrition surveys revealed that within the same income level household structure, some households contain malnourished members, especially women, while others do not. When it comes to droughts, it is worldwide recognized that this is one of the major impediments for development. Drought affects communities in different ways, with the most obvious impact being the shortage of water for domestic, agro-silvopastoral, and commercial uses, but with enormous consequences for gender roles. According to UNICEF, globally, women spend a collective 100 million hours every day collecting water. Carrying water also has a negative impact on the health of women of all ages. Water carrying methods impose physical loads with the potential to cause muscular and bone disorders and related disabilities. Recent studies in South Africa show that the prevalence of spinal pain was 69% and back pain was 38% for women carrying containers on their heads. But beyond water scarcity, the study highlights other differentiated impacts of droughts. Women, for example, and girls have a disproportionate share of unpaid care and domestic work, rooted in the highly unequal gender division of labor and distribution of care and domestic work responsibilities within the household and between the household and the state. And this intensifies in climate and environmental crises and disasters. In this regard, 9 national drought plans from parties to this convention are at the forefront of including reference to care work and drought in their plan. Other changes in diet patterns and quality of food are also differentiated. Due to the insufficient food consumed, women are highly prone to health issues. Inadequate food consumption leads to stomach aches, vomiting, weaknesses, diarrhea, and malnutrition. Food scarcity also exacerbates the challenges women experience during pregnancy. The prevalence of miscarriages and complications during childbirth are, in the worst cases, maternal and child death are higher in times of droughts due to undernourishment. School drops. Although both girls and boys drop out, the dropout rates and the reasons for and duration of the absence from schooling appear to be different between boys and girls, with girls less unlikely ever to return to their schooling. When migration occurs because of drought, women are exposed to two different scenarios, each with its respective repercussions. One group compromises women who remain at the head of the household because men migrate. These women must face the drought from those pre-existing inequalities, such as the non-recognition of women as farmers, the lack of land ownership, and relatively less power and voice than men. And those that migrate. Female migrants, as we know, are particularly at risk of sexual exploitation, trafficking, and violence. It is also worthwhile acknowledging a relative new topic to the links between gender-differentiated impacts of droughts, the psychological burden on women. 2 national drought plans mention these phenomena. This socially women, we have this moral obligation, the mother's duty to feed our children and our husbands. When women cannot exercise this role due to drought, this pressure can lead to depression and suicide in some cases. The data and trends cited above clearly demonstrate that the key drivers of women's higher drought risk are the pre-existing gender inequalities, which are socially constructed and embodied in the gender division of labor, in their unequal allocation of resources, care work, and gender discriminatory practices. Consequently, the need to acknowledge and address the root causes of vulnerability is highly influenced by and differentiated according to gender roles. Furthermore, the finding of this study also revealed that women are more vulnerable than men along 2 dimensions. They are more susceptible to the impacts of droughts and have less capacity to reduce drought risk and cope positively with them. Due to time constraints, I will not go in depth into the vast promising practices in the study that show how women are acting as well as agents of change related to land degradation and droughts. As stated earlier, this study also provides, for the first time, 5 new available data sets. For example, the research found that women participation in the last COP has been quite low, as 79% of the delegates attending COP14 were male and 21 female. Of the 55 countries sampled, 35 had no women participants at COP14, 43 had 1 to 3 women participants, 13 had 4 to 6, and only 9 had 7 or more participants. When we look at the land degradation neutrality profiles, we found that to have little inclusion of any gender-related data or analysis. Out of the 30 countries' LDN profiles listed under the UNCCD website, only 2, 6.6, included reference to women. However, of the existing 48 national drought plans, 98.53 included reference to gender. This may be attributed to the concerted efforts made by the global mechanism under UNCCD in providing close support and guidance to countries. In conclusion, gender disparities remain among the most pervasive of all inequalities, hindering the best development efforts. Unlike the coronavirus, there is not, and nor there will be, a vaccine against gender inequalities. The time for action has never been more imperative. We cannot continue abusing and exploiting the earth. It is past time we realize the same is true for women. As the United Nations Secretary General asserted, let us shift the view. Let us shift the narrative. Women and girls are agents of change and leaders. They are not vulnerable. They're portrayed as vulnerable and are made to behave as vulnerable by the society, the culture, the institution, the practices, and the laws that they cannot avoid and are forced to operate in. We need to dismantle the power structures that allow discrimination, violence, and economic hardship to keep us, one half of humanity, down. Thank you very much.
Mesdames et Messieurs, après le discours officiel d'ouverture de ce caucus sur le genre prononcé par la Première Dame Dominique Ouattara, nous venons d'assister à la conférence inaugurale et je vous prie de faire un triomphe pour permettre à nos officiels de se retirer et rejoindre les places du bas. On va applaudir bien fort nos Premières Dames, Dominique Ouattara, Denise Tshisekedi, ainsi que les membres des organisations du système des Nations Unies, qui vont poser pour la postérité et ensuite rejoindre les places qui leur sont réservées. On va les applaudir encore une fois, s'il vous plaît. Bah, d'accord, très bien. On va faire la photo de famille ici. Bien sûr, allez-y. Oui, on va la faire là, maman. Attention, attention. Bon, allez-y. Voilà, attends. On descend finalement. D'accord. Merci beaucoup. Un peu de chaleur pour nos Premières Dames, s'il vous plaît. Des ovations bien nourries. Allons-y. Je rappelle qu'après la photo de famille, nous allons ouvrir le dialogue ministériel avec plusieurs intervenants qui consisteront essentiellement à la présentation d'initiatives politiques sensibles au genre. Nous entendrons plusieurs ministres et officiels venus de plusieurs pays, dont la Côte d'Ivoire. La photo de famille. Et juste après la photo de famille, mesdames et messieurs, nous allons vous proposer une artiste, une virtuose de l'art, devrais-je dire, une dame dont la vie rime avec l'art. Je vous prierai d'accueillir dans quelques instants celle qu'on appelle, qu'il est convenu d'appeler dans le milieu, la reine-mère Were Liking. Voilà, pour la photo de famille, nous invitons l'ex-présidente de Finlande qui va se joindre aux officiels. Voilà. Monsieur. Voilà, merci beaucoup. On va applaudir encore une fois nos premières dames et les raccompagner à leur siège. Pour permettre à nos premières dames de souffler, ainsi que l'ensemble de nos officiels, mesdames et messieurs, je vous propose la reine-mère, Were Liking, avec sa troupe, qui va nous rejoindre sur la scène. Merci de les accueillir avec des ovations bien nourries en guise d'encouragement, s'il vous plaît. La régie. C'est quand vous voulez. Musique. Were Liking et ses danseuses et sa troupe, tout est en place, on n'attend plus que la régie. Voilà.
Asoreko na
applaudir bien fort pour la troupe de Wara et les Kings. Merci beaucoup. Merci infiniment. Merci pour cette belle... la régie, merci. Merci beaucoup. On va applaudir ces jeunes filles et garçons pour cette belle prestation. Merci infiniment. Excellences, mesdames et messieurs, au pas de charge, nous allons inviter pour le dialogue ministériel les personnalités ci-après citées. Monsieur Shahab Uddin, ministre de l'Environnement, des Forêts et du Changement climatique du Bangladesh, que je vous prie d'ovationner bien fort, s'il vous plaît. Monsieur Jochen Flasbart, secrétaire d'État de l'Allemagne, que nous allons accueillir également très chaleureusement. Monsieur Malcolm Stufkens, vice-ministre de l'Environnement du Honduras. Madame Mahotso Magdalene Sotiu, vice-ministre de l'Environnement de l'Afrique du Sud. Madame Vicky Ford, ministre pour l'Afrique du Royaume-Uni. Enfin, Madame Nassene Batouré, ministre de la Femme, de la Famille et de l'Enfant de la République de Côte d'Ivoire. Pour la modération de ce dialogue ministériel, j'invite à la tribune Madame Gabrielle Lipton, rédactrice en chef du Landscape Forum. Un dialogue ministériel qui devrait durer une demi-heure. Mesdames et messieurs, on va encore une fois les applaudir et suivre avec beaucoup d'attention ce dialogue ministériel.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you all for joining us here today. We're moving into our ministerial dialogue, showcasing gender-responsive policy initiatives. My name is Gabrielle Lipton. I'm the editor-in-chief for the Global Landscapes Forum, and it is my honor to be moderating this panel today. We've heard some sobering facts about gender equality, but we're also in the midst of an exciting time where changes are being made and decisions are being made to chart a new course for women in the future. So we have with us here today an esteemed panel of leaders from all regions of the world who are using their platform as policymakers to promote gender equality and to empower women and girls. And so we're going to hear from each of them a bit about the progress that's being made and what's been successful in their countries and in their regions. So welcome, Your Excellencies. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And you may make your statements from your seats. And we'll begin with His Excellency Shahab Uddin, the Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change for Bangladesh, who has served in Parliament since 2014 and driven afforestation efforts, particularly with a lens on social issues, including programs to help reduce the vulnerability of women. So Your Excellency Uddin, the floor is yours. No?
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First of all, on behalf of the government and the People's Republic of Bangladesh, and on my own behalf, I would like to convey my gratitude and thanks to UNCCD Secretariat for organizing the 15th Conference of the Parties as well as today's great event. I also like to express my thanks to the government and peoples of the Côte d'Ivoire for the hosting the COP15, extending very warm hospitality to us. Today's great event of the Gender Caucus hosted by the Honorable First Lady of Côte d'Ivoire, featuring the launch of the study on the differentiated impacts of the desertification and degradation and drought on women and men is really appreciable, praiseworthy, and commendable. From the core of my heart, I would like to express my thanks and gratitude to the Honorable First Lady of Côte d'Ivoire and other concerned persons and bodies. The study has revealed a sheer volume of new information, thought-provoking issues, as well as given a good number of recommendations with a view to drawing attention of the policy makers to develop appropriate policies and necessary steps to ensure gender equity in transparent and effective manner. Distinguished delegates, women can play a significant role in reducing and reversing land degradation. Women contributes to restore, protect, and improve land in a range of ways. You are well known that back in 2017 at COP13, through adoption of Gender Action Plan, the global leaders acknowledged the important roles of the women in restoring, protecting, and improving land, as well as sustainable management of land. Parties of the UNCCD also committed to ensure gender equity as a guiding principle in all policies aligned with the objective of conventions. With the bold leadership of our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, women have been given equal opportunity in all spheres of life in our constitution, the supreme law of the country. Since the independence of Bangladesh and onwards, we have formulated a range of policies, laws, and guidelines to ensure gender equity. With the dynamic leadership of our Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, a number of top posts are possessed by women. Ladies and gentlemen, due to land degradation, drought and salinity, food security and fresh water is hampered. Women and impacted severely due to a number of reasons, especially socio-cultural context. During the food crisis, women eat less, the malnutrition weakness them and ultimately causes disease and premature death. Women, especially in hilly and drought-prone areas, spend a lot of time collect fresh water for the beloved family members. Carrying fresh water from different sources has adverse effect on physical and mental health of women. In Bangladesh, climate change obstructs country's sustainable food security and makes its population, especially women, vulnerable to health as well as environmental shocks. Climate change-related risk and vulnerability are occurred through a number of channels such as land degradation, soil erosion, riverbank erosion, depletion of soil fertility, soil pollution, water pollution, coastal salinity, etc. All this adversely affected the population, particularly women, and tend to lose their lives and livelihoods. Honorable Chair, at the UNFCCC COP26, our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has highlighted on the demand of global responsibility for climate migrants displaced by droughts, floods, river erosion, salinity, sea level rise. The 8th five-year plan of Bangladesh undertakes a number of activities which will help to mitigate the severe problem of land degradation in Bangladesh and will support the global agenda of achieving sustainable development goals. The prime principle of the Sustainable Development Goal is inclusivity. It includes a commitment to leave no one behind and to endeavor to reach the furthest behind first, according to constitutional and global obligation. The government of the Bangladesh has taken a number of measures for vulnerable people, especially for women. The government has introduced gender budget in national budgeting system. With the scarce resource, Bangladesh is trying to its best to ensure gender equity. At the same time, we are encouraging and welcoming international cooperation and support through UNCCD Secretariat as well as global mechanism. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Minister. A number of important points made, particularly about linking policies to convention objectives, which we're here for today. We're soon going to continue with our program. We're just going to have a brief intervention related to the Côte d'Ivoire.
Thank you very much. Mesdames et messieurs, elles sont avec nous depuis le début de ce caucus sur le genre. Malheureusement, leur agenda ne leur permet pas de rester un peu plus. Je vous prie de saluer encore une fois la présence de nos premières dames, Madame Denise Tshisekedi et Madame Dominique Ouattara, présidente du caucus sur les genres. Elles vont se retirer, on va les ovationner bien fort. Et je puis vous assurer qu'après leur retrait, nous poursuivrons ce dialogue ministériel. Des ovations bien nourries, s'il vous plaît, pour Madame Dominique Ouattara et Madame Denise Tshisekedi. Merci à vous, Mesdames les premières dames. Merci d'avoir été des nôtres. Et on espère vous revoir dans d'autres circonstances tout aussi heureuses. Merci beaucoup. Okay, now you can continue with the... Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. We'll continue. We'll move on to His Excellency Johann Flassbart, the State Secretary of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. He came to this position last year after 8 years as the State Secretary to the Environment Ministry, and he's championed all sorts of efforts on all scales for social and environment issues. So please, State Secretary, tell us about your policies.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and again, ladies and gentlemen, very privileged to participate in this meeting. I want to repeat what I had said at the high-level meeting this morning, and that was that we will not be able to solve the land degradation issue if we don't come to gender equality. And I mention it here again, and that I mentioned it at the high-level meeting, because the ratio between male and female at the high-level meeting and here was quite different. And we have to make this point each and everywhere, because it is so true that we need to address the basic needs of gender equality in all of our agendas. Ladies and gentlemen, when, as mentioned, I took office in December together with my minister Svenja Schulze, and when we did so, we announced to follow a feminist development policy. And what we heard as comments in public was quite nasty and some bad jokes, honestly, basically from limited brains from my own sex. And that was just that we are not there where we should be in addressing this overall issue. So what we are going to do is to make gender equality a cross-cutting issue in all our policies. And that starts already with the question of education. Amina Mohamed mentioned the issue in her speech that the basic right of children is to be a child, and part of this is to be educated, and that is why we promote so very much the issue of education cannot wait, because that is a basic access to solve problems also in the area of land degradation. Number two is that we have to look at the land rights issue, and that was mentioned from the studies that women do not have the right access to land rights, and that is something we need to overcome, otherwise we will not fix the problem. And so the third one is that we need to allow access to technical assistance, because that is another gap in succeeding both on land degradation issues as well as on giving female equitable rights in societies. So what we did is we are accessing all our support schemes, cross-cutting as well as on the project level, that follows the approach of what we call reach, benefit and empower. Reach means ensure that women have access to advisory services. Benefit is that we need to allow them to have equitable access to the benefits, and empowerment means again to empower people to be part of this endeavor. And the good story is once we follow this track, we will not only be able to address land degradation, but also on vice versa to give female a stronger power in societies. Coming to the end of my intervention, Madam Moderator, looking at gender equality from our point of view is much more than addressing the human right of gender equality in the sense of protecting women. We strongly believe that societies with strong women and girls are also more resilient, stronger societies. Thanks.
Thank you so much, State Secretary, and thank you for bringing to our attention this holistic view that we need to approach gender equality with, that includes rights and also technical assistance to very key things. We'll now move to His Excellency Malcolm Stufkins, Vice Minister of Energy, Natural Resources and Environment for Honduras. He's a biologist and has worked heavily at the intersection of social systems and ecosystems. So please tell us about support that's being given to women in Central America.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure. Greetings to all the chiefs of staff and chiefs of the countries and different governments, to the colleagues and friends. For me, it's a pleasure to be here representing the Republic of Honduras, and please feel a big hug and greetings from our people, and especially from our first woman president, Iris Xiomara Castro de Celaya. It's the first female president of the country, so for me it's very important having this space in this gender caucus. We just had the first 100 days of the new administration, and there's been a strong turn on the new administration for Honduras, where we are going and having a really strong commitment on gender, of course, because we have the first female president, but also because there's a strong commitment on the protection of the environment, our natural resources, and especially bringing and working along with the people on the degradation and restoration of our forests and our ecosystems. So this has been a strong turn for our government, because for the last decade, natural resources have been just really affected and given out in different activities that were just degrading our natural resources and ecosystems. In Honduras, and giving some more data, less than 20% of the landowners are women, and 30% of those land users are women that can decide on what to do on this with their land and their resources. Women in our country and our region, and I know in the world, constitute a really strong force of work, and also for us, they're the guardians of the traditional and ancestral knowledge that is very important for us. 43% of that workforce, of the women workforce, is in the agriculture sector, which Honduras is very strong in agriculture, and its main productivity is that sector. The degradation, the drought degradation, and the desertification affects strongly on women. Women need and feel on the first hand the impacts of this desertification and degradation. That's why that affects directly to women, and to women. Why? Because this obligates to expand the borders of cultivation of the needs, and also women, not just in Africa, but also in America and in Central America, women have to walk further to get their firewood and also their water because of this degradation, these long droughts, and the desertification of our soils. We in Honduras, we start recognizing certain indicators of how the desertification and the drought is affecting women. Of course, the first one is poverty. Poverty, because poverty is a cause but also a consequence of the desertification and the degradation of our soils. So it's a need to work on the restoration, to avoid the poverty, and especially avoid this poverty that affects directly on women. Like I was saying before, firewood and water is one of the other indicators which is strongly affected directly on women, because they have to move further away to find water and also to collect firewood. Women are in charge of collecting the firewood. So if there's not enough firewood close by, it's the women who have to go out to find for more firewood. Food sovereignty, not only food security, but also this sovereignty, because we need to have this the food needed for all these families close by. If not, it's harder for the women to produce food for the family, and also especially because they're the ones that are in charge of taking care of the child. So what are we doing? And like our colleague here said, because of the strong impact of drought, desertification, degradation on women, we think it's also a big opportunity to focalize all these actions on fighting against the desertification and degradation through the women and through a gender agenda. How can we do this? We got to give access also to information and this capacity building to women, not just to men. And that is something that we are trying to do also in Honduras and in the region. And all the different projects that come in have to have a strong line on gender. It's not just saying how many women are participating, but also how many women can start deciding on what to do in their lands. We are now in this new administration, we are putting a strong indicator is that all the projects that are of land use and of food security have to at least include a 30% of women who are heads of household. That's how we're going to put into the gender into the agenda and the planification, the different planning, strategical planning. We got to work on different livelihoods. They're certified because the certification, the degradation is really affecting the different livelihoods. And we also have a strong agenda on water ministry because that is one of the big impacts into women. What do we have as a country and what are we working on? We already have a gender equity and environmental strategy. We also are building our gender action plan, and we also have a social inclusion in the updated NDC. It shouldn't just be in paper. We have to really implement it. So Honduras government, especially led by a female now, our first president, is really committed to support and better off the women's quality of life. And of course, from the government of Honduras, we support also the Abidjan Gender Declaration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vice Minister. It's great to hear that gender is being included in your NDC. I think that's an action that hopefully can be amplified in other countries as well. And a number of important points made about capacity building, decision making, diversifying livelihoods, and clean access to clean water. Thank you. We'll now move to this continent with Her Excellency Makotso Magdalene Sotiu, Deputy Minister of Forestry, Fisheries, and Environment for South Africa. She was previously a Deputy Minister of Arts and Culture and also of Police, so she brings a unique and diverse background to her current work. And please, Deputy Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and good evening to Your Excellencies, beautiful ladies around here today. I see that all men folk are starting to move out of the session. I'm getting worried because I can see from where I'm seated, mostly we have women in here. It is indeed heartening to see so many women gathered here today to participate in this gender caucus today. I would like to congratulate the government of Côte d'Ivoire and its people for hosting us in this beautiful city of Abidjan. I must maybe also indicate that the South African delegate who only arrived a day before yesterday, as we were also participating in Southern Korea on the World Forest Congress. We've been around the country for the past 15 days, but it's worth it if we want to save the planet. Thank you very much. Firstly, Excellencies and distinguished delegates, it is important to unpack why and how desertification, land degradation, and the effect of drought will affect the most vulnerable in our nations. I have taken note of the latest research that was read here with regard to my country, South Africa. In the same way that desertification, land degradation, and drought will have differentiated impact on developed and developing countries. DLDD is not gender neutral and will affect women differently to how it will affect men. Preconceived notion as to the roles that women are expected to perform, lack of access to employment, educational opportunities, and lack of property rights are just some of the ways in which women experience the world differently to men. Everything that has been mentioned here and everything I'm just trying to highlight from my country, it seems as if women all over the globe, we are experiencing the same. The progress is too slow when it comes to these issues because we are still not ready to mainstream gender issues into our programs, projects, policies, and strategies at all levels. As the world continues to be confronted by worsening land degradation, devastating impacts of droughts, climate change, floods, and zoonotic diseases such as COVID-19, women and youth are the most affected and remain vulnerable. There are several gaps in relation to women empowerment or addressing women inequality in the context of DLDD. Such include poverty, inequality, unemployment, and violence against women that we witness daily across the world. Lack of participation and representation of women at all levels is one of the critical issues that as this collective we need to consider. I know that we've been saying this in all the COPs since we started here, but unfortunately it seems as if when it comes to the real implementation, we are very much slow. Maybe it's because we have given the responsibility of implementing to the men folk. I'm sorry, men folk, that's how it is. More importantly, we still do not have financial mechanism dedicated for gender responsive programs. We often hear, even in this convention, reference to restoration funds, LDN funds, and many other forms of financial support across different multilateral agreements that exist at all levels. And this is also in agreement, I'm sorry, brother, and this is also in line with the Abidjan Declaration on achieving gender equality for successful land restoration that will be adopted here. Without dedication, funding for gender mainstreaming, we will always have these kinds of deliberation with no progress. I'm encouraged to see the participation of different donors and funding agencies at this caucus. And I would like to urge them to consider this critical aspect that are destroying the integrity and confidence of our women and youth, especially our girls. Excellencies, allow me to indicate that there is a direct relationship between gender equality, women's empowerment, and DLDD-related issues. DLDD and natural disasters affect everyone. In South Africa, we have witnessed that during the recent floods that hit one of our coastal provinces, those who've been in South Africa, when you speak about KwaZulu-Natal, we know that people know that we are talking about Durban. I know many people who visit South Africa would go to Durban. And also the Eastern Cape is one of our biggest provinces in South Africa, where over 400 people lost their lives, with more than 50 lives unaccounted for up to today. And this includes young children and women. It is imperative then that South Africa should continue to be at the forefront of mainstreaming gender into DLDD response. South Africa's response to DLDD and climate change challenges has demanded a stronger and decisive commitment to promote the inclusion of women's voices in every aspect of sustainable development. This commitment is reflected in our country's national strategy towards gender mainstreaming in the environment sector, where I come from. The purpose of this strategy is to provide a framework for gender mainstreaming in the environment sector by ensuring that initiatives in the sector are inclusive and promote meaningful participation of all women. Therefore, Program Director, we must always insist that women's empowerment must be a non-apologetic precondition in the advancement of development, sustainable land management, and poverty reduction. Furthermore, several efforts are being made at a national level to address barriers and gaps to empower women. Some of these women include, just to mention a few, prioritizing the inclusion of 65% of women participation on projects and programming, focusing specifically on addressing drought, water crisis, biodiversity loss, and wetlands conservation, job creation and sustainable growth specifically for women and rural communities. I think the research that was highlighted here said a lot about our rural women, because they are the most that are being affected when all this happened. Addressing violence against women and gender-based violence, in particular issues of rape and sexual offenses, are at a very high level in my country. economic empowerment of women, in particular, women-owned businesses, and development of rural women through provisions of capacity building for entrepreneurship, among others. Allow me to indicate that South Africa has a dedicated Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disability, which is tasked with providing strategic leadership, coordinating and oversighting to government departments and the country in mainstreaming empowerment programs on women, youth, and persons with disability. We have several initiatives that are aimed at empowering women in various crucial sectors. Women are beneficiaries of the Green Fund. In this Green Fund, Program Director, rural women are pioneering the commercial production of selected indigenous traditional medicine plants with the sale of herbal products, ensuring a fully functional and operational enterprise that provides green jobs. The environment sector is supporting a host of other projects around the country that promote environmental conservation and sustainable use, but at the same time impart skills to women in areas such as wetland conservation and repatriation. As I conclude, Program Director, the Ministry of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, that is the ministry that we are heading, is currently implementing empowerment equity that target employment of women in sector management positions. In 2021-22 financial year, 46% of women were employed in management positions. I'm talking about a department that is being led by a woman, a deputy of that department, myself, a woman. The Director General of that department is a woman. 6 Deputy Director Generals responsible for very crucial areas are women in that department. A Program Director. To conclude, just to give a teach of what is happening politically in my country when it comes to deployment. In our parliament in Cape Town, South Africa, 49% representation are women in parliament. 49% both women and deputy ministers in our cabinet are ministers appointed by the president 4 years ago. Women are mainly leading crucial departments. Just to mention a few, or to mention the department that I know that it has been mentioned by many countries here, Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, and Land Reform is being headed by a strong woman in my country. Therefore, economic transformation is the way to go so that we can better the lives of women and the lives of the girls. I thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister. It's incredible to hear about the number of women assuming leadership positions in your country. Just underlining your point about amplifying women into meaningful participation, not just participation itself. I also saw a number of heads nodding in the audience when he started talking about funding, so I think that's another issue. Channeling funds to women is crucial. We'll now move to Her Excellency Miss Vicky Ford, the United Kingdom's Member of Parliament and Minister for Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. She's had a long governmental career with a focus particularly on women and families through parts of it. So please, Minister Ford, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Excellency's Chair and wonderful women in this room. It is great to be with you. Give yourself a big clap, everybody. It's been a long day, but we are trying to save the world and make it better for so many millions of women. So thank you for being here. You know, it was an enormous honor for the United Kingdom last November to invite representatives of so many countries across the world to come to Glasgow for the COP26 conference. And leaders across the world at that meeting made such important promises to the people of our planet. And we need to make sure that they deliver on those promises. Yes, clap that, because that is the really important thing, is delivering on the promises. But when we met last November, the world was already facing a difficult time. We had climate change, we had the COVID pandemic, and the pandemic had put huge pressure on all of our countries, but even greatest pressure on the poorest countries. But now we have yet another challenge, because the war that Russia has caused in Ukraine, the illegal war that is so brutal, is also forcing the world's poorest people to have to deal with rising fuel prices, rising food prices, rising fertilizer prices, and we have to stand with them. We totally condemn Russia's actions, and we call on Russia to just stop. Take your troops out, lay down your weapons, and let us carry on focusing with all these other challenges that the world has. The UK is also one of the largest shareholders of the World Bank, and a few weeks ago I was able to go to the World Bank meetings, and I'm really glad that we worked with a lot of partners and with the bank to put together a big package of finance. It's an exceptional package, $170 billion, which will go and help the world's poorest countries to cope with these rising prices. $50 billion of that is to go out within the next 3 months. So I really hope that will go and help with the immediate impact on food security. But I'm here today at COP15 because we recognize the scale of the environmental challenges the world faces. Land degradation and climate change daily threaten the food security for so many people. Climate change hits the poorest communities hardest, and it hits women and girls most. The findings of the UN CCD desertification study were deeply stark. 2 weeks ago, I spoke to a mother in Somalia. The rain has failed for 4 seasons. Her family land is totally decimated. There are no crops. The livestock has all died. And she had walked for 17 days to find water, to find food. And she'd walked for 17 days with her 18-month-old baby on her back. And every day of that 17 days, with her 18-month-old baby on her back, her 8 other children were following her. We know that it is women and other marginalized groups who are more susceptible to drought and other climate shocks. They have fewer resources to help them recover in the aftermath. We know that they are often excluded from decision-making practices around land restoration and land stewardship. Disinheritance of the surviving spouse still occurs in 96% of countries. Inconsistent legal regimes restrict women's rights to access, use, and control the land that they need to feed their families. But we also know that women and girls are critical agents of change. There's a growing body of evidence, and we should look at the evidence because it shows that all of our efforts to tackle climate change and land degradation are simply more effective when they have the priorities of women at their heart. This morning, when our wonderful host and President Ouattara welcomed us all at the opening meeting, he spoke on behalf of the many national leaders who've come here today, and he said how sad he was that there wasn't a single woman leader there, and that he hoped in the future that will change. Well, I think we all hope that will change, but when I also looked around the room at the delegations from all the different countries, only 3 of the countries at this meeting have been represented by a woman leading the delegation. And gentlemen, you've made lovely speeches, but I never thought I would ever attend a round table at a gender event where all the men got to speak first. So let me just say this, because I have to say this. We will not solve the problems of the world unless we listen to the women. We will not solve the problems of the world unless we empower the women. And we will certainly not solve the problems of the world unless we harness the skills and knowledge of the women. So this is why the UK has been using our COP presidency, our leadership on the world stage, to advance gender equality and social exclusion within the climate action and finance. We really hope that all colleagues implement the UNFCCC Gender Action Plan and help to advance the goals of the Action Coalition on Feminist Action for Climate Justice. COP26 provided a vital platform for countries and other actors